Welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
And today we're going to be looking at a film that I think pretty much everyone has heard of, The Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, yeah. A classic.
But we're going to go a little bit deeper than that. We have some really interesting writing here that analyzes the film, its themes, its impact. And honestly, getting into this, I'm ready to be creeped out, but also, have my mind blown at the same time.
Yeah. It's one of those films that really gets under your skin.
It does.
And it's not just a surface-level thriller, is it?
Not at all.
This piece really dives into how The Silence of the Lambs goes beyond just jump scares and suspense. It actually combines psychological thrills with a really thought-provoking commentary on society. It's a pretty unique combination.
Yeah, it's like they took the best elements of a psychological thriller, a crime procedural, and then this whole other layer of social commentary and just rolled it all into one incredibly effective film.
Exactly. And it does it so seamlessly, too.
Yeah.
Like, if you think about how they handle Clarice Starling, for instance, she's not just running around reacting to things.
Right.
She's battling the killer, of course, but she's also battling the sexism from her male colleagues.
It's such a layered portrayal. And speaking of that, I was really struck by what this analysis had to say about Jodie Foster's performance.
Oh, absolutely.
The way she portrays Clarice's strength and resilience is amazing. You really get a sense of her fighting to be heard and taken seriously in this very male-dominated world of law enforcement.
She brings that struggle to life.
She does.
You know, that feeling of a woman trying to thrive in an environment where she's constantly being undermined. And even though the film is set in the 90s, that unfortunately is still a very relatable experience for a lot of women today.
Yeah, sadly, some things haven't changed as much as we'd like. But okay, we can't talk about The Silence of the Lambs without talking about Hannibal Lecter, right?
Of course not. He's the heart of the film in many ways.
He is. He's terrifying, obviously, but there's this undeniable charisma about him that just makes him so captivating.
He's magnetic, even though he's a monster.
Yeah, you should be repulsed, but you can't help but be fascinated by him.
This source describes him as elegantly evil, which I think is just perfect.
I love that description.
He's not a brute force villain.
No.
He uses his intelligence, you know, and this chilling psychological manipulation to get what he wants.
Oh, and it's so effective.
Remember that line, the census taker line?
Oh, God, yes. That line is burned into my memory.
Chilling, isn't it?
So creepy, but it's also delivered with this dark humor that just makes Hannibal Lecter even more unnerving.
Exactly. And that's all Anthony Hopkins. His delivery is what really sells it. He turns Lecter into this iconic villain who's both terrifying and strangely fascinating.
Speaking of villains, though, this source also raises some interesting points about Buffalo Bill.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's horrifying, but the analysis argues that he actually feels somewhat underdeveloped as a character. And the way he's portrayed could even be considered problematic.
It's a valid critique. The source argues that Buffalo Bill's characterization leans heavily on some harmful stereotypes, and it potentially links gender nonconformity with violence, which is obviously a very sensitive and complex issue.
And it makes you wonder how that portrayal would be received today with our evolving understanding of gender identity and representation.
It's definitely a reminder that even critically acclaimed films can reflect the limitations of their time.
And that brings us to the whole theme of power dynamics, which this film seems to be full of.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, you see it most clearly in the interactions between Clarice and Hannibal.
Yes.
It's this constant battle, a back and forth, each of them trying to assert control over the other.
If we zoom out a bit, though, I think The Silence of the Lambs, even though it's set in the 90s, it still has a lot to say about how women navigate male-dominated spaces and the subtle, often insidious forms of sexism they encounter.
Yeah, it's like Clarice's fight against Buffalo Bill is also playing out on this larger societal stage.
It is. And it's a fight that's sadly still relevant today.
And speaking of things that are still relevant, I was really impressed by what the source had to say about Jonathan Demme's direction.
Oh yeah, he's a master.
They particularly highlighted his use of close-ups.
Which are so effective in this film.
Incredibly effective.
They create this feeling of claustrophobia.
Yes.
And they really draw you into the intensity of the characters' interactions.
I felt that especially in the scenes between Clarice and Hannibal.
Oh, absolutely.
Demme uses those close-ups to pull you into their psychological battle.
Like you're right there in the room with them.
Exactly, and you can practically see the wheels turning in their minds as they size each other up.
His pacing is another thing that stands out.
Oh, the pacing is brilliant.
It builds tension so masterfully, leading up to that heart-pounding climax in Buffalo Bill's basement.
You're on the edge of your seat the entire time.
Exactly.
Oh.
It's a masterclass in suspense building. It's like he knows exactly how to manipulate the audience's emotions. But, let's talk a bit about the acting, because this source really dives into the nuances of the performances, particularly Jodie Foster as Clarice.
Oh yeah, Foster's performance is incredible.
It really is. She brings this depth and complexity to the character. She captures both Clarice's intelligence and vulnerability at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a really powerful portrayal of a woman who's strong and capable, but she's also allowed to be human.
Yes.
She's allowed to show fear and doubt.
Exactly.
And I think that's what makes her so relatable.
Right. She's the symbol of strength and determination. But she's also allowed to have those moments of weakness, It makes her feel like a real person, someone you can root for.
Absolutely. And then you have Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter.
Oh my God.
It's hard to imagine anyone else in that role now.
It is.
Yeah.
It's like he was born to play that part.
The way Hopkins delivers those lines, it's just chilling.
This source points out that Hopkins manages to bring a certain elegance to Lecter's evil, which is such a weird thing to say.
It is, but it's true.
It's true, though. He's not just some, bloodthirsty monster. He's sophisticated. He's an intellectual predator.
He is.
Which makes him all the more terrifying.
Right.
Because he sees right through people.
Yeah.
He preys on their weaknesses. And it's all a mind game with him.
Exactly.
Which is so captivating to watch, but also so disturbing.
Oh, absolutely.
And it actually reminds me of how the source talked about the film's exploration of power dynamics.
Yes.
It's not just a thriller, it's also a commentary on how power is used and abused.
Right.
Particularly in the relationships between men and women.
You see it in how the film subtly exposes those power imbalances.
Yes.
And highlights how women are often marginalized.
Right.
How their voices are silenced or dismissed.
And Clarice is constantly battling against that.
She is.
Even though she's so smart and capable.
It makes you think about the systemic challenges that women still face today.
It does.
Especially in those male-dominated fields.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even though the film was made decades ago, those issues are still very much present.
They are. It's frustrating, but it's also important to acknowledge.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking of things that are important to acknowledge, I thought it was interesting how the source pointed out that Clarice actually perseveres despite those challenges.
Oh, she does. She's a fighter.
She uses her intelligence, her empathy, to overcome those obstacles.
She's navigating this minefield of expectations and prejudices.
She is.
But she never lets it completely derail her.
She's determined to succeed on her own terms.
Exactly.
And it's inspiring to see. It is, it actually ties back to our earlier discussion about Buffalo Bill.
How so?
Well, the source pointed out that his portrayal could be seen as problematic, relying on harmful stereotypes.
Right.
And it makes you think about how those stereotypes contribute to the very power imbalances that Clarice is fighting against.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's like a vicious cycle.
It is, and it's a reminder that even films we enjoy can have these problematic elements that reflect the biases of the time they were made in.
It's definitely a reminder to be critical of the media we consume.
Even the stuff we love.
Yeah, even our favorites.
And speaking of things we love about this film, we have to give Demi credit for creating such a thought-provoking and thrilling experience.
Oh, absolutely. He's a master storyteller.
And I think that's what makes The Silence of the Lambs so enduring, right?
It's not just entertainment.
No.
It stays with you.
It does.
It makes you think about these bigger issues.
Yes.
Power, gender, the darkness that exists within seemingly normal people.
And the idea that the monsters we fear might not be so different from us.
Exactly. That's a chilling thought.
It is.
But it's also what makes the film so powerful.
It's a film that challenges our perceptions of good and evil.
It does.
And it makes us question our own capacity for both.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
But I also think there's a message of hope in the film, don't you?
I do. I do.
Despite all the darkness, The Silence of the Lambs reminds us that we can choose to fight against those impulses.
Yes.
To stand up for what's right.
Even when it's difficult.
Even when it's difficult. And you see that in Clarice.
Clarice is like a beacon of strength and resilience in this film.
She is. She's a reminder that we're not defined by our fears or the darkness around us.
We have the power to choose our own path.
And that choice, That inner strength is ultimately what elevates The Silence of the Lambs beyond just a genre film.
Right.
It becomes a story about confronting those demons,
Right.
both internal and external,
Right.
and finding the courage to persevere.
And I think that's one of the reasons it's resonated with so many people for so long.
That's true.
It's not just about the scares or the suspense.
Right.
It's about that deeper struggle, that human element that we can all relate to.
Exactly. And the way Demi tells that story, it's just masterful.
Oh, yeah.
From the cinematography to the score, everything just works together
Yes.
to create this unsettling atmosphere that pulls you right into the heart of the story.
I love how he uses silence in the film.
The silence.
Yeah, it's not just the absence of sound. It's like he uses those moments of silence
Yeah.
to create tension, these pauses where you can almost hear the characters thinking, plotting, feeling.
Yeah, it's like the silence itself becomes a character.
It does.
Amplifying the suspense
Yes.
and the psychological intensity of the scenes.
It's so effective.
I think that's a big part of what makes The Silence of the Lambs so effective as a thriller.
Yes.
It gets under your skin.
It does, and it stays with you long after you've seen it.
It really does.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that stay with you, this source also highlighted the film's ending,
Oh, yeah, the ending.
which is not your typical happy ending.
Right.
Clarice catches the killer,
Right.
but there's this lingering sense of unease.
Yeah.
Almost like a warning that the darkness isn't truly gone.
It's like a reminder that the battle is never really over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it such a powerful ending.
It's thought-provoking.
It is.
It leaves you with this feeling that we all have a role to play in standing up to the darkness.
Right, whether it's in our own lives or in the world around us.
So, for you, the listener, what does all of this mean? We've really dug deep into the themes of The Silence of the Lambs, explored its impact, talked about its lasting relevance, and I hope this deep dive has encouraged you to think about how this film, even decades later, still has something to say about power, gender, and the choices we make when faced with darkness. If you haven't seen it or haven't watched it in a while, I highly recommend giving it another look. Pay attention to how those themes play out, how the filmmakers use all the tools at their disposal. From those intense close-ups to the chilling use of silence, to create this captivating and disturbing cinematic experience. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was a pleasure.